The topic is remote sensing. Often it's you need to see the detail behind the on-ground component before we look at the bigger picture of remote sensing. Because we have such a huge NRM region and largely treeless plains, Mitchell Grass Downs is the above Boulia there and above Longreach is the predominant landscape. So minimal trees means that it really lends itself to using remote sensing and a lot of drone technology. A lot of the work that we do is focused around threat removal. Often it's for a conservation purpose. So the process that we're trying to work through usually is mapping and prioritising the weeds and threats, looking at regulatory tools to support efficient control. It's a really big landscape and there's not that many people out there, so it requires a lot of on-ground active effort. We're always looking for innovative solutions. We're a really small team of people, it varies, but usually about a dozen people. We actually have a field team that's recently just expanded to 5 people. So often owner-operators are very time poor. When we have the funds available, or they may actually pay our team to come out and actually remove the various threats or implement the management. So it's a little bit different to some of the other NRM groups. What that means is we need to carefully work out what the budgets and how big the problem is before we get there. So a lot of the work that we've done has been on how can we do that more efficiently, more cheaply, and drones and remote sensing is the easy way for us to do that. We also use it quite a lot for monitoring and evaluating the success of our projects, particularly when we're trying to find the last couple of, say, living prickly acacia trees. So the picture on the top right is what it looks like before, and then our team come through like a plague of locusts and hand treat each individual tree, putting out, in this case it is chemical, tebuthyron. There are some biocontrols, but I'm not focusing on that today. The picture on the bottom right is an example of rubber vine in a spring. So even in, for us, what's a relatively small area, that's still 400 hectares, give or take, of a spring where we're trying to remove rubber vine, and even bigger. So the bright green that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner is rubber vine, and all of the other trees are prickly acacia in the top 2 images. It is an enormous area to try and cover and to get across, but these are some of the critters that live in those areas that we're trying to protect. So top left is the Julia Creek dunnart, that's often found in the Mitchell Grass Downs, and the redfin blue-eye fish amongst edge-basting goby. There's snails, all sorts of species unknown to science in the GAB springs. Of course, you can't see any of that with the remote sensing. So what we're trying to do is use proxy estimates to look at land condition. So the data that we're trying to collect, this is the rough example I use of how I try and collate everything together. So others have mentioned some of the other tools that we can use, like the time-lapse or trail cameras. Nearly all of our region is outside mobile coverage, so anything that we do has to be either physically collected or has to be satellite based. So, for example, some of those springs, they might be 2 or 3 hours from the nearest town. So we've got to do nearly everything outside of mobile coverage. We also use, the other team have gone, we also use Fulcrum app to collect our field data. We've got 30 or 40,000 records of field observations in there over several years. So we're starting to get to the point now where it's managing the bulk of the data, not just collecting the new stuff. We do have some remote rain gauges that we use. It's a long way to go to, if you're travelling 3 or 4 hours from the nearest town to know whether there's been rain locally or not. So we do have some satellite rain gauges out. We use a lot of open data, and the key one is the remote sensing. In Queensland, we're really lucky to have the Queensland Remote Sensing Centre that supply us with a lot of data to analyse ourselves, but it's also made freely available in some fantastic front-end tools that you can get access to yourself. I'm not going to break out of this presentation until we get to the end, just in case I break the IT, but the websites that I'd highly recommend that you have a look at is the longpaddock.qld.gov.au. You can put in either your lot on plan details, so the property information, or you can go in and map a specific area if you've got somewhere that you're managing, and you can get, I think it's like 15 to 20 odd different reports. They will email you a clipped out section of your property or the area that you're interested in managing. There's another website called Veg Machine. It does a very similar thing. So it helps you look at the remote sensing signatures, and you can look at the long-term trends over time. You know, has your ground cover improved over time? Is it above, say, the 30% threshold, which is what you need for protection from wind? Or above, in our region, it's about 60% is likely to protect, above 60% ground cover at the end of the dry season is what's going to protect you from water erosion. Collecting all of this data, though, we always try and keep in mind the outcome that we're trying to get to. So it's either working with the landholders to figure out the investment plan, a grazing management plan. It's a predominantly grazed environment, the monitoring plan and change over time, and we try and collate all of that information together in a report. So we can do a lot of that manually, but machine learning and deep learning has made that much, much easier. But in order to build those models, we have to collect a huge amount of data in the back end. So in this example, following floods, for example, the imagery from the recent floods, the best that was available was a 3-metre resolution. Previous floods, we'd been able to go out with our own drone, so we do have our own REOC, and collect a broad sweep of images to help calibrate what we were seeing with the satellite imagery. We built some tools to do some batch renaming and resizing, and we can put that back into Fulcrum. We're able to share that with other experts so that they can help us quantify the potential impact of the damage that we were seeing. Often landholders aren't going to be going out during those periods, and access is really limited even for us. But we have transferred that information back into a mobile app, and then some of these sites we are still working on. This image happens to be from the 2019 monsoon event, but we're still working with the landholders on those projects through the DRFA, Disaster Recovery Program. While we can collect fairly rapidly, the free frame images is what the example was before. That's just a single drone photo. It's just getting a much better vantage point. What we started using a lot more is orthomosaic. So that's collecting a whole bunch of images, running the drone sort of like a snake backwards and forwards across the landscape and stitching them all together. We use the drone deploy software to generate really large orthomosaics, and it lays, particularly where we go back repeatedly to the same site, it lays it over the top of each other. And then we use some machine learning tools to analyse the information in them. We're trying to cover large areas, so it won't be an entire property, but it'll be intense areas where we're going to do a lot of work. For example, around dams, waterways and old bore drains, because that's where a lot of the problems are. We're looking at creek lines where there's potentially lots of flood damage. And we're really looking at pasture change over time, and the change in that case, you can see in the background is prickly acacia is the dominant tree there. It should be an open pasture, Mitchell grass pasture. So some of the analysis that we do is at different levels of the machine learning component. So we've got some really basic, or we call them dumb calculators, which we 100% control. Is it green or is it not, is the key question that we're asking. Now, when we're using the drones, we can ask those questions in short time frames. With the remote sensing information, we've got much longer time frames. So the persistent green, so that's areas that are persistently green over time. It's a 3-year, very complex average, but you don't get anything for the preceding 2 years. So we're using the drones to fill in the more immediate timescale. We also use the Esri machine learning package and the deep learning component. So that's where we have some control. The machine learning component is where we have some control, and we're still checking what's on there. And then we feed the test sites into the deep learning tool. So this is some examples where we go out and collect the field data. Excuse me. As I mentioned, we've got 30 or 40,000 observations across properties at different scales. Some properties we might go back to a couple of times as they've invested in threat mitigation. We do long-term monitoring, we come back and we might need to do another round of monitoring. Gradually, we're using drones and the remote sensing component to detect where prickle trees are coming back into the landscape. The visits that we've done in the last couple of weeks, we've had some really, really good wet seasons over the last 3 years, or since 2019. It's essentially been good wet seasons. They may be delayed, but what that has meant is that previously we might have seen growth of particularly in the prickly acacia trees, sort of up to 1 metre high over 12 months, maybe 2 years. We're now seeing that within sort of 6 months. So you've got fully reseeding trees that have sprouted from seeds that were in the landscape. So a property that was previously clean, the seeds are germinating really quick that was still sitting in the landscape, and they're growing really quickly. So it's beating a little bit the remote sensing that we're doing. So it's we'll get back into the drone work. So this is an example of the basic greenness calculators that we use. So the picture on the left is taken at the end of the dry season. So usually the only thing that's left green in that landscape is the prickly acacia tree. So for this project, we were looking at a couple of things. One is improved perennial pasture cover. And we actually have camels in this small paddock, which is a bit weird in an NRM group having a herd of camels. But what they do is eat the fruits and the buds. And if you're unable to get in and control the prickly acacia straight away, the camels can potentially significantly reduce the seed bank because they don't spread it in their manure. Cow manure has thousands and thousands of beautiful little garden seeds that will come up in them from just cattle moving the prickly acacia. So what we're looking at in these pictures is the extent of the pasture increasing, or are the camels having an impact on it? And what's the change in the canopy of the prickle trees when they get green and fluffy after the wet season? And then through time, we're looking at the change in the actual canopy. So are the camels going to have an impact on the canopy and actually shrink the canopy? The answer is yes, they do, but we need a lot more camels to have that big impact. And so there's a paper written on the camels in the Australian, presented to the Australian Rangeland Conference that goes into this a lot more detail. So what we're doing is calculating the total area of the canopy and looking at the change over time. We're also using this site to train our deep learning models. So we're collecting imagery various times of the year, collecting a whole bunch of samples, exporting the training data, putting it into a deep learning model, doing the analysis and looking at the number of trees before and after. Now, these ones are just camels, but I've also got an example where we've gone through and treated with chemical. This project was actually done by a Year 11 student with our guidance, of course. He came out, just rang us out of the blue and said, can I do some work with you guys? So this is Nathan. He was Year 11 at the time. So he did more than 50 hours of supervised flight time, and then he spent 2 or 3 weekends putting 25,000 dots on that one little paddock. He enjoyed it. He wanted to get those dots finished. So what you can see in the background there is a little bit of a zoomed out view. You can kind of see that there's a subtle difference between some of the trees. So what we're looking at is Parkinsonia, is the orange dots. The bright blue ones are all prickly acacia. And what he couldn't see, but we know from being on site, is that there's also mimosa bush, which is Vaccalia phoeniciana. The prickly acacia is Nilotica, Parkinsonia, and there's no native trees inside that paddock, I don't think. So what we're looking at is the spatial arrangement of those trees, how many are dead, because some do naturally die, and it does frost off in this area. And by the way, that was the only time that camels started eating the grass to any noticeable degree, was when all of the prickle trees were frosted. Then they had no choice but to start eating a little bit of the grass. So we're still researching this site, and as it so happens, his older brother has come to work for us as a drone pilot, which is fantastic, because they also helped us plant a couple of thousand trees, which is always handy to have some young and enthusiastic helpers. So we've this example image is from 2021, but we've got these through maybe quarterly, maybe twice a year, and they're doing some of them monthly at the moment. Another example of where we've used the technology is on a very broad area to count the number of trees and then go back afterwards and see, is there 1 or 2 trees that we've missed across this area? So the example on the left is the image. We trained on, I think for this one, about 200 or 300 trees. There's both prickly acacia and mimosa bush in this area. We ran the machine learning tools and estimated roughly the number of likely trees. I can't remember the number off the top of my head now, but it was not an insignificant amount. So we were looking at 95% efficiency in recognition of what we call prickle trees by machine learning, so using the maximum likelihood analysis. There was a little bit of confusion where there was likely mimosa bush, because they're very, very similar trees, and even in the field sometimes you have to go up to them and have a look at count the number of leaves if they don't have seed pods, or you can't really distinguish them with the flowers, but there's a sort of general vibe that you can get of the difference between them when you're out in the bush, but that's because you're looking at from side on, whereas the remote sensing or the drones are only looking at them from the surface. And because we're trying to be quite efficient with our data collection, we're not using RTK drones, so not the expensive ones, and we're not using a waffle pattern, which is flying both this way and then back the other way to get a height estimate. It would just be too slow to cover these sorts of areas. So this is several hundred hectares, this demonstration test site where we were collecting a lot of the imagery. So that's hopefully what it looks like. So if you ever travel out Winton Way, is the area where it's most obvious, between Winton and Kynuna. Both sides of the road you see squillions of dead trees, and I love seeing that because they're all prickly acacia trees. Can be a problem for tourists travelling through, because we have to say why there's all of these dead trees out on the roadside. It's not farmers doing naughty things, it's actually a lot of time and effort on the landholder's behalf, and then some of it's our field team to get the pasture recovery after you remove the prickly acacia trees. This particular area here was treated with a drone. We don't normally treat that kind of density. We usually use the drones for the really high density areas where it's too hard for people to get into, but we were using it as a test site. We're applying, for this example, it was tebuthyron to allow pasture to recover quicker. So all of the work that we're doing at the moment is looking at accelerating pasture recovery. It's not the only threats that we're looking at removing. So our monitoring and evaluation component also includes, I think others have mentioned, trail cameras and time-lapse cameras. I haven't figured out how to analyse the phenotype type trail camera images to get a good visual on what grows. Unfortunately, in the vertisol, the cracking plains, your post that you've put the trail camera on does this when you start doing time-lapse photos, and it really makes you sick. So I haven't figured out how to fix how to stop that swaying. I don't know. I don't know what sort of gear that we'll have to use for that. But you do see a lot of critters out in the landscape. Some other technology that we use is, and we spent a fair bit of time sharing this information with landholders, rangers, other NRM staff, is this particular bit of software is called theodolite. So when you take a picture, it's stamping onto your picture the GPS location, the angle that you're facing, the compass direction that you're facing. It can also do some A/B height calculations. So this one is iOS only, I think, and it's called Theodolite. There's another one called Solocator that's in both systems, and there's a free one in Android called Dioptra that almost does the same thing. I mention this one because it is such a fantastic tool when you're doing monitoring sites so that you can time your observations back to a point and time. We also use GoPro cameras where we just stick them on the windscreen of the car. Fantastic resource, particularly when we're looking at burnt areas, doing fauna surveys. This one has the GPS in it, and it's a relatively small data set. Doesn't cost me anything to collect. You can see a lot in the pictures, particularly for burnt areas. So we use it for doing broad area surveys. The other type of, although it's not our remote sensing that we use, but we cover a large area, and so we're often looking at things remotely. So this particular app is called bushfire.io, but there's another one called NAFI, N-A-F-I. They're both fantastic resources, even combined together, to give you a lot of information about place. Bushfire actually sends you a text message if you set up the alerts, and you can use the free version. What you can see down the bottom is the hotspot analysis, so that you can see where the burns have occurred. You can also see the plains when there is water bombers going overhead, and you can get alerts when there's been a 000 call. And they've recently upgraded it so that you can now see lightning strikes and potential fires that might have started as a result of those lightning strikes. Fantastic resource for looking after remote areas. Well, that's the formal bit done. Happy to show that Long Paddock website. It is a fantastic resource, and it can show you back to 1978, give or take, the ground cover for your place. Do we have a crack? Hey, there we go. Thank you. So you go to this forage page. Down the side here, it's got some examples of the report. There we go. An example of ground cover, and it's giving you the different cover levels along here. The stuff that we do internally shows this same information, but this one is available to anybody to get at any time. There's a whole bunch of reports that you can download here. All you need to do is put in lot and plan information. If you want to get even fancier, you come back to this page and you can use My Forage. Only available in Queensland, but it's the data for it is sitting on the Turn portal. So if you want to get into the back end, you can actually download all of the raw data, and it's there. The data analysis component is expanded for all of Australia, certainly I think Northern Territory and New South Wales. I'm just not sure about WA. Fantastic resource. And